The Hidden Psychology That Controls Your Decisions, published by MindForge Audiobooks. Introduction. You feel like you are in control of your decisions. Every choice you make seems logical, intentional, and carefully thought out. But what if that feeling is an illusion? What if most of your decisions are not truly yours, but are shaped by hidden processes you rarely notice? The truth is, much of your thinking is not conscious. It is automatic. Your brain is constantly working in the background, using past experiences, emotions, and mental shortcuts to guide your actions. This happens so quickly and smoothly that it feels like you are in full control, even when you are not. These invisible mental patterns influence what you believe, how you judge situations, and the decisions you make every day. They decide what feels right, what feels wrong, and what feels safe. And because they operate quietly, you rarely question them. This is why even intelligent, capable people often make poor decisions. It is not because they lack knowledge or logic. It is because their thinking is influenced by biases, emotions, and automatic reactions that feel correct in the moment, but lead to mistakes over time. The cost of this unconscious decision-making is higher than you think. It affects your relationships, your finances, your habits, and your future. It keeps you repeating the same patterns without understanding why. In this audiobook, you will uncover the hidden psychology behind your thinking. You will learn how your mind really works, why it sometimes misleads you, and how to recognize the patterns that control your choices. Because once you see what is happening beneath the surface, you gain something powerful: awareness. And with awareness, you can begin to take back control. Chapter 1. You're not thinking, you're reacting. You believe you are thinking through your decisions. You pause, you consider, you choose. It feels deliberate, it feels controlled. But in reality, most of the time, you are not truly thinking. You are reacting. Your brain operates on two different systems. One is slow, deliberate, and logical. It takes effort. It analyzes information, weighs options, and makes careful decisions. The other is fast, automatic, and emotional. It works instantly, without effort, and it is responsible for most of what you do every day. The problem is not that the fast system exists. It is necessary. It helps you move quickly, saves energy, and allows you to function without overthinking every small task. But the issue is that this system is in control far more often than you realize. Think about your daily life. You wake up and check your phone. You scroll without thinking. You choose what to eat, what to wear, how to respond to messages. You react to situations, people, and emotions almost instantly. These actions feel like decisions, but most of them are automatic patterns. This is what autopilot looks like. You are not carefully analyzing each step. You are following habits, routines, and emotional triggers that have been built over time. Your brain is simply repeating what it has learned before, and because this process is smooth and immediate, it creates the illusion of thinking. It feels like you chose to check your phone. It feels like you decided to react in a certain way. It feels like you are in control, but often the decision was already made before you became aware of it. Your conscious mind then steps in and explains the action. It tells a story that makes your behavior seem logical and intentional. But in many cases, that explanation comes after the fact. It is like a narrator arriving late and trying to make sense of something that has already happened. This is why reactions feel like choices. When something triggers you emotionally, anger, excitement, fear, you respond immediately. You speak quickly. You act without pausing. And afterward, you justify it. You tell yourself why it made sense, why it was the right response. But the truth is, the reaction came first. The reasoning came later. This pattern plays out in many areas of your life. In conversations, you react based on tone and emotion, not always on what is actually being said. In spending, you feel an impulse to buy, then justify it as a reward or necessity. In relationships, you respond based on past experiences, not the present situation. Over time, these reactions form patterns. and those patterns shape your behavior. The more you repeat them, the stronger they become. Your brain prefers these automatic responses because they require less effort. Thinking deeply takes time and energy. Reacting is fast and easy. So your mind chooses speed over accuracy. But speed comes at a cost. When you rely on automatic thinking, you stop questioning your actions. You assume your first response is correct. You trust your feelings without examining them. And this leads to mistakes, not because you are incapable, but because you are not fully aware. This is where awareness becomes important. Awareness is the ability to notice what is happening inside your mind before you act. It is the moment between stimulus and response, the pause where you can choose instead of react. Most people never develop this pause. They move from trigger to action instantly, without noticing the process in between. And because of that, they live in a constant loop of automatic behavior. The same triggers create the same reactions. The same reactions create the same outcomes. And the cycle continues. Breaking this cycle does not require you to eliminate automatic thinking completely. That is not realistic. But it does require you to become aware of it. You begin by slowing down. The next time you feel the urge to act quickly, pause, even for a few seconds. Notice what you are feeling. Notice what you are about to do. Ask yourself a simple question. Is this a reaction or a decision? That question creates distance. It interrupts the automatic process and brings your conscious mind into the situation. It gives you a chance to think, not just react. At first, this will feel difficult. Your brain is used to moving quickly. It will try to pull you back into old patterns. But with practice, that pause becomes easier. And within that pause, something powerful happens. You gain control. You begin to choose your responses instead of being driven by them. You start to see your habits, your triggers, and your patterns more clearly. You realize that not every thought needs to be followed. Not every feeling needs to be acted on. Not every impulse needs to be obeyed. This is the difference between reacting and thinking. Thinking requires effort. It requires attention. It requires slowing down long enough to examine what is happening. Reacting is automatic. It is fast, familiar, and often unconscious. Most people live in reaction mode because it is easier. But living that way means your life is shaped by patterns you did not consciously choose. When you begin to slow down, even slightly, you shift out of autopilot. You start to see where your behavior is coming from. You begin to question what once felt obvious. You notice the difference between impulse and intention. And that awareness changes everything. Because once you see that you are reacting, you have the opportunity to do something different. You can pause, you can think, you can choose. And in that small shift, from reaction to awareness, you take the first step toward real control. Not the illusion of control, but actual control over your thoughts, your actions, and ultimately, your life. Chapter 2. The Brain's Survival Mode. Your brain was not designed to make you successful. It was designed to keep you alive. This single truth explains many of the decisions you make and many of the mistakes you repeat. Long before modern life, your brain had one priority: survival. It needed to detect danger quickly, react instantly, and keep you safe at all costs. There was no time for careful analysis or deep thinking. If something moved in the distance, you reacted. If a sound felt threatening, you avoided it. Speed mattered more than accuracy, because in that environment, being wrong was safer than being slow. If you assumed danger when there was none, you stayed safe. If you assumed safety when there was danger, you risked everything. So your brain evolved to favor quick reactions over correct ones. That survival system still exists today. But the world around you has changed. You are no longer avoiding predators. You are making decisions about your career, your relationships, your finances, and your future. These decisions require patience, logic, and long-term thinking. But your brain still reacts as if every situation is a threat. This is where the problem begins. Your brain is designed for survival, not accuracy. It does not ask, what is the best decision? It asks, what is the safest decision right now? And those are not always the same. This is why fear plays such a powerful role in your life. Fear is your brain's fastest signal. It appears before logic has time to respond. It tells you to stop, to avoid, to stay where you are. It makes uncertain situations feel dangerous, even when they are not. When fear appears, your body reacts immediately. Your heart rate increases. Your thoughts become focused on risk. Your attention narrows. In that moment, you are not thinking clearly. You are protecting yourself. This is why fear-based decision-making is so common. You avoid opportunities because they feel uncertain. You stay in familiar situations because they feel safe. You delay action because you fear making the wrong move. And all of this feels reasonable. It feels like you are being careful. It feels like you are making smart decisions. But often, you are simply reacting to discomfort. Your brain confuses unfamiliar with dangerous. Anything new, uncertain, or outside your routine triggers a mild version of the same survival response. It may not feel extreme, but it is enough to influence your behavior. This is why your brain avoids risk. Not because risk is always harmful, but because your brain cannot easily distinguish between real danger and perceived discomfort. Starting something new feels risky. Speaking up feels risky. Making a big decision feels risky. So your brain pushes you toward what is known. It chooses comfort. Comfort is predictable. Comfort is familiar. Comfort requires less energy. And because your brain values safety, it rewards you for staying within that comfort zone. But there is a cost. Comfort keeps you stable, but it also keeps you the same. Growth, on the other hand, requires uncertainty. It requires stepping into situations where outcomes are not guaranteed. It requires making decisions without complete information. It requires accepting discomfort as part of progress. This is why comfort and growth rarely exist together. If you choose comfort, you avoid risk, but you also limit progress. If you choose growth, you face uncertainty, but you expand your possibilities. Your brain naturally pushes you toward comfort because it feels safer, but that safety is often short-term. In the long term, avoiding risk can lead to missed opportunities, limited experiences, and a sense of being stuck. This is the hidden effect of survival mode. It protects you from immediate discomfort, but it also prevents long-term development. To move beyond this, you need to understand one important idea. Not everything that feels dangerous is actually dangerous. And not everything that feels safe is actually right. Fear is a signal, but it is not always accurate. It tells you something feels uncertain. It does not tell you that something is harmful. This distinction changes how you respond. The next time you feel hesitation, instead of immediately stepping back, pause and ask, is this truly a threat or just something unfamiliar? That question creates space. It allows your logical thinking to engage instead of letting your survival instinct take over. You begin to see that many of your fears are not about real danger. They are about discomfort, uncertainty, or change. And once you recognize that, you gain a new option. You can still feel fear, but you don't have to follow it. This is where growth begins. Growth does not happen when fear disappears. It happens when you move despite fear. The people who progress are not those who feel no fear. They are those who understand that fear is part of the process, not a signal to stop. They recognize that their brain is trying to protect them, but they choose to think beyond that protection. They shift from automatic reaction to conscious decision. Over time, something important happens. The more you face situations that feel uncomfortable, the more familiar they become. And as they become familiar, your brain stops treating them as threats. What once felt risky starts to feel normal. This is how you expand your comfort zone. Not by avoiding discomfort, but by stepping into it repeatedly until it no longer feels threatening. Your brain learns through experience. When you act despite fear and nothing harmful happens, your brain updates its understanding. It begins to see that not all uncertainty leads to danger, and gradually your responses change. You hesitate less. You decide faster. You feel more in control. Not because fear has disappeared, but because you no longer treat it as a command. This is the shift from survival mode to awareness. You still have the same brain, the same instincts, the same reactions, but you relate to them differently. You recognize when your brain is trying to keep you safe, and you decide whether that protection is necessary. Sometimes it is, but often it is simply holding you back. And in those moments, you choose growth over comfort. You choose progress over safety. You choose to act, not because it feels easy, but because you understand what is happening beneath the surface. Your brain will always prioritize survival. That will never change. But your awareness allows you to choose something more, not just staying safe, but moving forward. Chapter 3. Cognitive Biases. Control. You believe you see the world as it is. You believe your judgments are based on facts, logic, and clear thinking. But in reality, your mind is constantly filtering, shaping, and sometimes distorting what you see. These distortions are not random. They are patterns built into the way your brain works. They are called cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts. They help your brain process information quickly without using too much effort. Without them, even simple decisions would feel overwhelming. But while these shortcuts save time, they often come at the cost of accuracy. They do not show you reality as it is. They show you reality as your mind interprets it. And because these interpretations feel natural, you rarely question them. One of the most powerful biases is confirmation bias. Once you believe something, your mind begins to look for evidence that supports it. At the same time, it ignores or dismisses anything that challenges that belief. If you think someone is trustworthy, you focus on their positive actions and overlook their mistakes. If you believe something will fail, you notice every sign that supports failure and ignore signs of success. You are not searching for truth. You are searching for agreement. This is why people often stay stuck in the same beliefs, even when evidence suggests they should change. It is not because they lack information, it is because their mind filters information in a way that protects what they already believe. Over time, this creates a loop. You believe something. You find evidence that supports it. That evidence strengthens your belief, and the cycle continues. Another common bias is the overconfidence illusion. You feel certain about your knowledge, your decisions, and your abilities. That certainty feels strong and convincing. But often it is not based on complete understanding. People tend to overestimate what they know and underestimate what they don't. When something goes right, you may credit your skill. When something goes wrong, you may blame external factors. This creates a false sense of control. You feel confident, but that confidence is not always accurate. It can lead you to take risks without fully understanding them, or to ignore important details because you believe you already know enough. Overconfidence is dangerous because it reduces curiosity. When you believe you are right, you stop questioning. When you stop questioning, you stop learning. And when you stop learning, mistakes become more likely. Another powerful bias is availability bias. Your brain tends to judge situations based on what is easiest to remember, not what is most accurate. If you hear about a rare event repeatedly, through news, social media, or stories, it begins to feel common. If something is vivid or emotional, it feels more important than it actually is. For example, hearing about a single negative event many times can make it seem like it happens often, even if it is rare. Your mind uses what is available in memory to make decisions. But memory is not always reliable. It is influenced by emotion, repetition, and attention, not by accuracy. This means your perception of reality can become distorted. You may overestimate risks that are actually small. You may underestimate opportunities that are less visible. And without realizing it, your decisions are shaped by what stands out, not what is true. All of these biases lead to a deeper issue. You see what you expect to see. Your beliefs, experiences, and past patterns create a filter through which you interpret the world. That filter shapes your perception. Two people can experience the same situation and see completely different things. One may see opportunity, another may see risk. One may see potential, another may see limitation. Both believe they are seeing reality, but they are actually seeing their interpretation of it. This is why your perception feels so convincing. It is not because it is always correct. It is because your brain presents it as if it is. It fills in gaps. It simplifies complexity. It creates a story that feels complete. And once that story is formed, you trust it. This is how cognitive biases quietly control your thinking. They influence what you notice. They shape how you interpret it. They guide the decisions you make. And most of the time, you are not aware it is happening. The challenge is not to remove these biases completely. That is not possible. They are part of how your brain works. The goal is to recognize them. Awareness is the first step. When you notice that your thinking may be influenced by bias, you create space to question it. Instead of asking, "Am I right?" you begin to ask, "What might I be missing?" That shift is powerful. It opens your mind to new information. It allows you to see beyond your initial reaction. It reduces the influence of automatic thinking. You also begin to slow down your judgments. Instead of accepting your first conclusion, you examine it. Instead of trusting your immediate feeling, you question it. This does not make your thinking perfect, but it makes it more accurate. Over time, this awareness changes how you approach decisions. You become more curious. You become more flexible. You become less certain, but more thoughtful. And that is the difference between automatic thinking and conscious thinking. Cognitive biases will always exist. They will always influence your perception. But when you begin to see them, they lose some of their power. You are no longer fully controlled by them. You start to see the difference between what feels true and what actually is. And in that awareness, you gain something valuable: the ability to think more clearly. Chapter 4. Emotions decide first. You believe you make decisions with logic. You think you analyze, compare options, and then choose what makes the most sense. But in reality, the process usually works in reverse. You feel first, then you think. Before your logical mind has time to act, your emotions have already made a decision. And what you call thinking is often just your mind explaining and justifying what you already feel. This happens so quickly that you don't notice it. A situation appears. An emotion rises instantly, and your response begins forming before you are aware of it. This is because emotions are faster than logic. Your brain processes emotional signals almost immediately. They are designed to guide quick action. Logic, on the other hand, takes time. It requires attention, effort, and analysis. So in most cases, emotion leads and logic follows. Think about a moment when you made a decision that felt right at the time but later seemed questionable. In that moment, you did not carefully analyze every detail. You felt something: excitement, fear, urgency, and acted on it. Only later did you reflect and question your choice. That is the pattern. Emotion decides. Logic explains. This is especially clear with strong emotions like fear, anxiety, and impulse. Fear is one of the most powerful drivers of behavior. It pushes you to avoid, to step back, to protect yourself. When fear appears, your body reacts immediately. Your focus narrows. Your thinking becomes defensive. In that state, your goal is not to find the best solution. It is to feel safe. This is why fear often leads to decisions that limit growth. You avoid opportunities because they feel uncertain. You stay in situations because they feel familiar. You delay action because you fear making a mistake. And in each case, your mind finds a logical explanation. It's not the right time. I need more preparation. I should wait a little longer. These explanations feel reasonable, but often they are just justifications for an emotional decision that has already been made. Anxiety works in a similar way. It creates a constant sense of uncertainty. It makes you question your choices, replay situations, and imagine negative outcomes. Under anxiety, your mind becomes focused on what could go wrong. This leads to hesitation. You think more, but you act less. You analyze, but you do not decide. And again, it feels logical. It feels like you are being careful, thoughtful, responsible. But in reality, anxiety is controlling your behavior. Then there is impulse. Impulse is the opposite of hesitation. It pushes you to act quickly, often without thinking. It is driven by desire, excitement, or immediate reward. You see something you want, and you act. You feel a strong emotion, and you respond. Later, your mind explains it. I deserved it. It made sense at the time. It wasn't a big deal. But the decision was not based on careful reasoning. It was driven by emotion. This pattern, emotion first, logic second, shapes many areas of your life. In relationships, you react based on feelings rather than facts. In spending, you follow desire rather than long-term thinking. In decisions, you prioritize comfort over clarity. And because your mind provides logical explanations afterward, you believe your actions are fully rational. This is the illusion. You're not always making logical decisions. You're often justifying emotional ones. Understanding this is not about removing emotions. That is not possible, and it is not necessary. Emotions are important. They provide signals, highlight priorities, and give meaning to your experiences. The problem is not emotion itself. The problem is acting on emotion without awareness. When you act immediately on what you feel, you give emotion full control. And when emotion is in control, logic has little space to operate. This is why creating space is important. Space between feeling and action. That small gap is where real thinking begins. The next time you feel a strong emotion, pause. Do not react immediately. Do not speak instantly. Do not decide right away. Instead, observe. Notice what you are feeling. Name it if you can. Fear, anxiety, excitement, frustration. This simple act of noticing slows the process. It shifts you from automatic reaction to conscious awareness. Then ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Is this emotion helping me make a better decision? These questions do not remove the emotion, but they reduce its control. They bring your logical mind into the process. This does not mean you will always make perfect decisions, but it does mean your decisions will be more balanced. You will consider both what you feel and what makes sense. Over time, this practice becomes easier. You begin to recognize emotional triggers more quickly. You pause more naturally. You respond with more clarity. You also begin to see patterns. You notice when fear leads you to avoid. You notice when anxiety leads you to delay. You notice when impulse leads you to act too quickly. And with that awareness, you gain choice. You can still feel fear, but you do not have to follow it. You can still feel anxiety, but you do not have to stop. You can still feel impulse, but you do not have to act immediately. This is the difference between being controlled by emotion and being guided by it. Emotion gives you information, but it should not make the decision alone. Logic needs space to contribute, and that space is created through awareness. Most people never create this space. They move from feeling to action instantly, without noticing the process, and because of that, their lives are shaped by emotional patterns they do not understand. But when you begin to slow down, even slightly, everything changes. You stop reacting automatically. You start responding intentionally. And in that shift, you gain control, not by removing emotion, but by learning to work with it, because emotions will always come first. But what you do next, that is your choice. Chapter 5. The habit loop of decisions. You often believe your decisions are new. You think each choice is based on the present moment, your current thoughts, your current situation, your current needs. But in reality, many of your decisions are not new at all. They are repeated patterns. Your brain runs on loops. These loops are built from past experiences, reinforced over time, and triggered automatically without your awareness. This is known as the habit loop, and it follows a simple structure: trigger, action, reward. This cycle explains why you behave the way you do and why certain patterns are so hard to break. It begins with a trigger. A trigger is anything that starts the process. It can be external, like a situation, a place, or a person. Or it can be internal, like a feeling, a thought, or a state of mind. Stress can be a trigger. Boredom can be a trigger. Loneliness, frustration, even excitement. These can all start the loop. Once the trigger appears, your brain moves to the next step: action. This is the behavior you perform in response to the trigger. It happens quickly, often without much thought. Because you have done it before, your brain recognizes the pattern and follows it automatically. You reach for your phone, you avoid a task, you react emotionally, you make an impulsive decision. Then comes the final step: reward. The reward is what your brain receives from the action. It is not always something positive in the long term, but it provides immediate satisfaction or relief. Scrolling gives you distraction. Avoiding gives you temporary comfort. Reacting releases emotion. Impulse gives you instant pleasure. And that is enough. Your brain does not focus on long-term outcomes. It focuses on immediate results. If an action reduces discomfort or provides a reward, your brain marks it as useful. Over time, this loop becomes stronger. The trigger becomes linked to the action. The action becomes linked to the reward. And the pattern becomes automatic. This is why you repeat bad choices. Not because you want to, not because you lack awareness, but because your brain has learned a pattern that feels effective in the short term. Even when you know something is not good for you, the loop continues, because in the moment, the reward still works. This is where the problem lies. Short-term relief often leads to long-term damage. Avoiding a difficult task may reduce stress in the moment, but it creates more pressure later. Reacting emotionally may feel satisfying, but it damages relationships over time. Making impulsive decisions may feel good now, but it leads to regret later. Your brain does not consider these long-term effects when the loop is active. It only focuses on the immediate reward. This creates a cycle. You feel discomfort. You take action to relieve it. You receive a reward. The pattern is reinforced. And the next time the same trigger appears, the same behavior follows. Over time, this becomes your default way of responding. You do not think about it. You do not question it. You simply repeat it. This is why change feels difficult. You are not just changing a decision. You are interrupting a pattern that has been repeated many times, and your brain resists that. It prefers what is familiar. It prefers what it has learned, even if that pattern is not helping you. Breaking this loop requires more than awareness, but awareness is where it begins. You need to see the pattern clearly. The next time you find yourself repeating a behavior, pause and look at it. What triggered this action? What did you do? What reward did you receive? This simple observation reveals the loop. Once you see it, you can begin to change it. The key is not to remove the trigger. Triggers will always exist. You cannot eliminate stress, emotions, or situations from your life. But you can change your response to them. Instead of focusing on the trigger, focus on the action. When the trigger appears, your brain will still push you toward the usual behavior. But this is where you create a small interruption. You pause, even briefly. That pause gives you a moment to choose differently. Instead of following the old action, you replace it with a new one. If stress triggers avoidance, you take a small step forward instead. If boredom triggers distraction, you choose a productive activity. If emotion triggers reaction, you pause before responding. The new action does not have to be perfect. It just has to be different. And it must still provide some form of reward. This is important. If the new action does not feel rewarding, your brain will not adopt it. So you create a new type of reward. Progress, completion, a sense of control. These may not feel as immediate as the old rewards, but over time, they become stronger. As you repeat this new loop, your brain begins to adapt. The trigger stays the same, but the action changes, and the reward evolves. Gradually, the old pattern weakens, the new pattern strengthens, and your behavior begins to shift. This process takes time. You will not change every pattern immediately. You will still fall back into old habits. But each time you interrupt the loop, You create a new possibility. You show your brain that there is another way to respond. And with repetition, that new way becomes easier. This is how you move from automatic behavior to intentional decision-making. You are no longer controlled by the loop. You are shaping it. Your life is not built on single decisions. It is built on repeated patterns. What you do consistently becomes who you are. So if you want to change your outcomes, you must change your patterns, not all at once. Not perfectly, but gradually. One interruption at a time, one new action at a time. Because once you understand the habit loop, you realize something important. You are not stuck. You are repeating. And what you repeat, you can change. Chapter 6. Social Programming Shapes You. You believe your thoughts are your own. You believe your opinions, preferences, and decisions come from your personal thinking. But much of what you think has been shaped long before you ever questioned it. You are influenced by your environment. From childhood, you absorb ideas from family, school, culture, and society. You learn what is normal, what is acceptable, and what is successful. These ideas become part of your thinking, not because you chose them, but because you were exposed to them repeatedly. This is social programming. It happens quietly. No one tells you directly, think this way. But through constant exposure, you begin to adopt certain beliefs as your own. What success looks like, what failure means, how you should behave, what you should want. Over time, these ideas shape your identity. You do not just observe them, you internalize them. And because they feel familiar, you rarely question them. Your environment continues to influence you every day. The people around you, the content you consume, the conversations you hear, all of these shape your thinking. If you are surrounded by negativity, your thinking becomes more negative. If you are surrounded by growth, your thinking expands. This influence is constant. Even when you believe you are thinking independently, your mind is being shaped by what you see and hear. One of the strongest effects of social programming is comparison. You compare your life to others, their success, their progress, their appearance, their achievements. This comparison often happens automatically. You see someone doing better and you feel behind. You see someone struggling and you feel relief. Social media amplifies this effect. You are constantly exposed to curated versions of other people's lives. Highlights, achievements, and moments of success are presented as reality, and your mind begins to measure itself against that. This creates a trap. You start defining your worth based on external standards. You seek validation instead of clarity. You adjust your behavior to match what is accepted. This leads to a subtle shift. Instead of asking, "What do I truly want?" you begin asking, "What will be approved?" This is the validation trap. When you rely on external approval, your confidence becomes unstable. It rises when you are praised and falls when you are criticized. You begin to depend on feedback from others to feel certain about your decisions. And the more you rely on it, the less you trust your own judgment. This is how social programming limits your thinking. It moves your focus outward. You look at what others are doing. You follow what others believe. You adjust to fit in. This leads to another powerful pattern: herd mentality. Herd mentality is the tendency to follow the group. When many people believe something, it feels true. When many people do something, it feels right. Your brain is wired for belonging. Being part of a group feels safe. It reduces uncertainty and provides a sense of acceptance. So when you see a majority moving in a certain direction, you are more likely to follow, even if you do not fully understand why. This can be helpful in some situations, but it can also be limiting. You may follow trends without questioning them. You may adopt beliefs without examining them. You may make decisions based on what is common, not what is correct. This is how thinking turns into following. Following feels easy. You do not need to question. You do not need to decide independently. You simply align with what others are doing. But thinking requires effort. It requires you to pause, question, and sometimes stand apart from the group. It requires you to be comfortable with uncertainty and disagreement. And this is not easy. because thinking independently can feel uncomfortable. You may feel uncertain. You may feel isolated. You may face disagreement from others. But this discomfort is necessary. Without it, you remain within the limits of your environment. You continue to think what you have been taught to think. You continue to follow patterns that may not serve you. The difference between thinking and following is awareness. When you are unaware, you follow automatically. You absorb ideas without questioning them. You adjust your behavior without noticing it. You accept beliefs without examining them. But when you become aware, you begin to question. You ask, is this what I truly believe? Or is this something I have learned to believe? That question creates space. It allows you to separate your own thinking from external influence. You begin to notice where your ideas come from. You recognize the impact of your environment. You see how comparison affects your perception. You understand how validation shapes your decisions. And with that awareness, you gain choice. You can still be influenced, but you are not controlled. You can choose what to accept and what to question. You can decide which inputs shape your thinking. This is important because your environment will always influence you. But you can influence your environment. You can choose what you consume. You can choose who you spend time with. You can choose what ideas you allow into your mind. These choices shape your thinking over time. If you expose yourself to growth, your thinking expands. If you expose yourself to limitation, your thinking contracts. You also begin to reduce unnecessary comparison. Instead of measuring yourself against others, you focus on your own direction. You stop seeking constant validation. You start trusting your own decisions. This does not mean ignoring others completely. It means using external input as information, not as authority. You listen, but you decide. You observe, but you think. You consider, but you choose. Over time, this builds independence. You become less reactive to external pressure. You become more stable in your thinking. You become clearer about your direction. And most importantly, you begin to live based on intention, not imitation. Social programming will always exist. It will always influence your thinking. But when you become aware of it, it loses its control. You move from following to thinking. And that shift changes everything. Because once you begin to think for yourself, you are no longer limited by what others expect. You are guided by what you choose. Chapter 7. The Illusion of Control. You believe you are in control. You believe your thoughts are deliberate, your decisions are intentional, and your actions are chosen with awareness. It feels that way. Every choice you make seems to come from a clear, conscious process. But much of that control is an illusion. The human mind is designed to create a sense of control, even when most processes happen automatically. This is not a flaw. It is how your brain maintains stability. It gives you the feeling that you are directing your life, even when many decisions are already in motion before you notice them. To understand this, you need to look at two parts of your mind, the conscious mind and the subconscious mind. Your conscious mind is the part you are aware of. It is slow, logical, and deliberate. It is where you think, analyze, and make decisions. At least, that is what it feels like. Your subconscious mind works differently. It is fast, automatic, and emotional. It processes information constantly in the background. It stores habits, patterns, memories, and learned behaviors. It reacts quickly, without waiting for your conscious approval. And here is the key point. The subconscious acts first. The conscious mind explains later. When you face a situation, your subconscious mind responds immediately. It uses past experiences, emotions, and patterns to generate a reaction. By the time you become aware of it, the process has already begun. Then your conscious mind steps in. But instead of making the decision, it often justifies it. It creates a logical explanation for something that was already chosen. This is why you feel in control. Because your conscious mind tells a story that makes sense. It says, I chose this. I decided this. This is logical. But in many cases, the decision was influenced before that story even began. Think about small daily actions. reaching for your phone, reacting in a conversation, making a quick purchase, avoiding a difficult task. These often feel like choices, but they are usually reactions. They follow patterns your brain has learned over time. You do not stop and analyze every step. You do not carefully evaluate every option. You act, then you explain. This is where the illusion of control becomes clear. You are not always choosing your thoughts. You are experiencing them. They appear automatically, and because they feel natural, you accept them without question. This is especially true with emotions. When you feel fear, your body reacts instantly, your heart rate changes, your focus narrows, your mind prepares for action. You do not choose this response. It happens automatically. Then your conscious mind interprets it. It creates meaning. It builds a narrative. It justifies your reaction. But the emotional response came first. This pattern repeats in many areas of life. You believe you are thinking carefully, but often you are responding quickly, and then convincing yourself it was thoughtful. This does not mean you have no control. It means your control is limited without awareness. Real control does not come from trying to stop your subconscious. It comes from recognizing it. The moment you become aware of a reaction, something changes. You create a small gap between stimulus and response. That gap is where control exists. Without awareness, there is no gap. A situation happens, you react, the loop continues. With awareness, the process shifts. A situation happens, you notice your reaction, you pause, you choose your response. That pause may be small, but it is powerful, because it allows your conscious mind to participate before the action is complete. This is how you move from automatic behavior to intentional decision-making. It begins with observation. Start noticing your thoughts, not trying to change them immediately, just observing them. What are you thinking in certain situations? What emotions appear? What actions follow? This observation reveals patterns. You begin to see that many of your reactions are predictable. They follow familiar paths. Once you see these patterns, you can interrupt them. Not perfectly, not every time, but gradually. When you feel an impulse, pause. When you feel a strong emotion, observe it. When you are about to act automatically, slow down. Ask yourself, is this a reaction or a decision? This question brings awareness into the moment. It shifts your role. You are no longer just reacting, you are examining. And that examination creates space for choice. Over time, this practice becomes stronger. You begin to notice your thoughts earlier. You recognize patterns faster. You respond more intentionally. Your subconscious still generates reactions. That does not change. But your relationship with those reactions does. You stop treating them as commands. You start seeing them as signals, signals that can be followed or not. This is the difference between illusion and reality. The illusion is thinking you are always in control. The reality is understanding when you are not and choosing to take control in those moments. It is not about controlling every thought. That is not possible. It is about choosing how you respond to those thoughts, and that is where real power lies. Because once you develop awareness, your decisions become more intentional. You are no longer driven entirely by past patterns. You are guided by present choice. And with time, those choices begin to reshape your patterns. What was once automatic becomes intentional. What was once reactive becomes controlled. This is how real control is built, not through force, but through awareness. Because control is not something you start with, it is something you develop. The moment you stop assuming you already have it. Chapter 8. Overthinking is a trap. Thinking feels productive. When your mind is active, analyzing options, considering possibilities, and reviewing outcomes, it creates the impression that you are making progress. You feel engaged. You feel responsible. You feel like you are being careful. But thinking more does not always lead to better decisions. In many cases, it leads to confusion. Overthinking begins with a simple intention: to make the right choice. You want clarity, certainty, and the best possible outcome. So you start analyzing. You look at every option. You consider every risk. You imagine every possible result. At first, this feels useful, but as the process continues, something changes. Instead of becoming clearer, your mind becomes crowded. New possibilities appear. New doubts emerge. New questions replace old answers. What started as thinking turns into looping. You revisit the same ideas. You replay the same scenarios. You search for certainty that never fully arrives. This is the trap, because the more you think, the more uncertain you become. Every option has advantages and disadvantages. Every decision carries some risk. Every outcome has unknowns. And when you try to eliminate all uncertainty, you create more of it. This leads to paralysis by analysis. You are not stuck because you lack information. You are stuck because you have too much of it and no decision. You delay action. You tell yourself you need more time, more clarity, more confidence. But in reality, you are avoiding the moment of decision. Overthinking becomes a form of protection. It protects you from making a mistake. It protects you from facing uncertainty. It protects you from taking responsibility. As long as you are thinking, you are not acting. And as long as you are not acting, you are not risking failure. But you are also not moving forward. This is the hidden cost of overthinking. It feels safe, but it keeps you stuck. You remain in the same place, repeating the same mental patterns, without real progress. Over time, this affects your confidence. Every delayed decision sends a message. I am not ready. I am not sure. I need more time. That message repeats, and eventually it becomes a belief. You start seeing yourself as someone who hesitates, someone who struggles to decide, someone who needs certainty before action. But the truth is, certainty rarely comes before action. It comes after. Clarity is not the result of thinking alone. It is the result of experience. You do not fully understand something until you engage with it, until you act, observe, adjust, and learn. Action provides feedback. It shows you what works, what does not, what needs to change. Without action, you are left with assumptions, and assumptions can only take you so far. This is why overthinking is not just unproductive, it is misleading. It gives the illusion of progress without actual movement. You feel like you are doing something, but nothing is changing. To break this pattern, you need to shift your approach, not by eliminating thinking completely, but by limiting it. Thinking should lead to action, not replace it. Instead of asking, what is the perfect decision? Ask, what is the next step? This question changes the focus. It removes the need for certainty. It reduces pressure. It turns a complex problem into a simple action. You do not need to solve everything at once. You only need to move forward. Even a small step creates movement, and movement creates clarity. Once you act, you gain new information. You see real results instead of imagined outcomes. You learn from experience instead of speculation. This reduces confusion, because now your thinking is based on reality, not possibility. Another important shift is accepting imperfection. Overthinking is often driven by the desire to avoid mistakes. You want to get it right. You want to choose the best option. But no decision is perfect. There will always be unknowns. There will always be risks. Waiting for a perfect decision is a way of delaying any decision. Instead, focus on making a good enough decision, one that allows you to move forward. You can adjust later. You can learn as you go. You can correct mistakes, but you cannot improve a decision you never make. You also need to recognize when thinking becomes repetitive, when you are no longer gaining new insight, when you are simply revisiting the same ideas. That is the point where thinking stops being useful, and action becomes necessary. Set limits for yourself. Give your thinking a boundary, a specific amount of time, or a clear decision point. Once you reach it, act. This trains your mind to move forward instead of staying stuck. It builds decisiveness. And decisiveness builds confidence. Over time, this changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who overthinks. You start seeing yourself as someone who decides. someone who moves, someone who learns through action. This does not mean you will always make the right choices, but it does mean you will continue progressing. And progress is more valuable than perfection, because progress leads to growth, and growth leads to clarity. Overthinking keeps you in your head. Action moves you into reality, and reality is where change happens. The goal is not to stop thinking. The goal is to stop letting thinking control you. Use thinking as a tool, not as a barrier. Think enough to understand, then act, because in the end, clarity does not come from thinking more. It comes from doing and learning along the way. Chapter 9. Your reality is filtered. You believe you see the world as it is. You trust your eyes, your thoughts, and your interpretations. When something happens, it feels clear. It feels real. It feels like truth. But what you experience is not pure reality. It is a filtered version of it. Your brain does not show you everything. It selects, interprets, and shapes information before you become aware of it. This process happens instantly and automatically, which is why it feels accurate. But what feels true is not always complete. This is the difference between perception and reality. Reality is what actually happens. Perception is how you interpret what happens. And those two are not always the same. Your perception is shaped by many factors: your past experiences, your beliefs, your emotions, and your expectations. These elements act like filters, changing how you see situations. Two people can experience the same event and walk away with completely different interpretations. One may see opportunity. Another may see risk. One may feel confident. Another may feel uncertain. The situation is the same. The perception is different. This is because your mind is not neutral. It does not observe without influence. It interprets based on what it already knows. Your past plays a major role in this process. Every experience you have had leaves a trace. It builds patterns in your mind. It creates expectations about how things work. When you face a new situation, your brain compares it to past experiences. If something reminds you of a negative experience, your perception becomes cautious. If something feels familiar and safe, your perception becomes more positive. This happens quickly. You do not stop and analyze it. You simply feel it, and that feeling shapes your interpretation. For example, if you have experienced rejection before, you may begin to expect it. When someone responds slowly, you assume disinterest. When someone is quiet, you assume something is wrong. But these assumptions may not reflect reality. They reflect your past. Your brain is trying to predict and protect. It uses previous experiences to guide present interpretation. But this process is not always accurate. It is based on patterns, not facts. This leads to misinterpretation. You may misunderstand situations. You may assume intentions that are not there. You may react based on perception rather than reality. And because your perception feels real, you rarely question it. You believe what you see. You trust what you feel. But your perception is only one version of the situation, not the full picture. This becomes a problem when you treat your interpretation as absolute truth. You stop questioning. You stop exploring other possibilities. You respond based on assumptions. Over time, this creates a fixed way of seeing the world. You begin to expect certain outcomes. You interpret situations in similar ways. You reinforce your existing beliefs. This creates a cycle. Your perception shapes your reaction. Your reaction influences your experience. Your experience strengthens your perception. And the loop continues. This is how your reality becomes filtered. Not because the world is fixed, but because your interpretation is consistent. Breaking this pattern begins with one simple shift. Question your perspective. The next time you interpret a situation, pause. Ask yourself, is this what actually happened? Or is this how I am seeing it? This question creates distance. It separates reality from interpretation. It allows you to consider other possibilities. Maybe the situation is not what you assumed. Maybe there are other explanations. Maybe your perspective is incomplete. This does not mean your perception is always wrong. It means it is not always complete, and recognizing that opens your thinking. You become less reactive, you respond with more awareness. You also become more flexible. Instead of holding on to one interpretation, you explore alternatives. You consider different angles. You listen more carefully. You observe more closely. This reduces misunderstanding. It improves your decisions. It helps you respond to situations more accurately. Another important shift is recognizing emotional influence. Your emotions can change how you see things. When you are stressed, situations feel more negative. When you are calm, the same situation feels manageable. The external event does not change. Your internal state does. This means your perception is not fixed. It changes based on how you feel. And if you are not aware of that, you may treat temporary feelings as permanent truth. By noticing your emotional state, you gain clarity. You can ask, am I seeing this clearly? Or am I reacting based on how I feel? This awareness helps you avoid unnecessary reactions. It gives you time to understand the situation more accurately. Over time, this practice changes how you experience the world. You become less certain, but more accurate. You stop assuming quickly. You start observing carefully. You recognize that your view is one perspective, not the only one. This does not weaken your thinking. It strengthens it. Because now, your decisions are based on deeper understanding, not immediate interpretation. Your reality is still shaped by your perception. But now, your perception is guided by awareness. You are no longer trapped in automatic interpretations. You are actively examining them. And that changes everything, because when you question your perspective, you open the possibility of seeing things differently. And when you see things differently, you respond differently. Your actions change, your experiences change, your outcomes change, not because reality changed, but because you saw it more clearly. Your mind will always filter reality. That does not stop. But when you become aware of those filters, you gain something powerful. The ability to adjust them. And in that adjustment, you begin to see the world and yourself with greater clarity. Chapter 10. Breaking the mental pattern. Your life is shaped by patterns. Not just big decisions, but small repeated actions. The way you respond, the way you think, the way you choose, these are not random. They follow patterns your brain has built over time. And most of these patterns run automatically. You do not notice them. You do not question them. You simply repeat them. This is why change feels difficult. Because you are not just changing a decision, you are breaking a pattern. To do that, you need a simple process: awareness, pause, choice. This is the foundation of conscious thinking. It starts with awareness. You cannot change what you do not see. Most of your reactions happen quickly. A situation appears, and you respond immediately. There is no gap, no reflection, just action. Awareness slows this down. It allows you to notice your thoughts as they appear, to recognize your emotions as they rise, to see your behavior before it fully happens. This may feel small, but it is powerful, because the moment you notice a pattern, you step outside of it. You are no longer fully inside the reaction. You are observing it. That observation creates the next step: pause. The pause is where everything changes. Without a pause, your brain follows the usual path: trigger, reaction, outcome. But when you pause, even for a moment, you interrupt that flow. You create space. And in that space, something new becomes possible. You are no longer forced to react. You are given the opportunity to choose. The pause does not need to be long. It can be a breath, a second of stillness, a moment of awareness. But it must be intentional, because that pause weakens automatic behavior. It slows down the pattern enough for your conscious mind to engage. And that leads to the final step: choice. This is where real change happens. Instead of repeating the old reaction, you choose a new response, not based on habit, not based on impulse, but based on intention. At first, This may feel difficult. Your brain will still push you toward the familiar path. It will suggest the same reaction. It will pull you toward what is comfortable. But this is where effort is required. You choose differently, not perfectly, not every time, but intentionally. For example, if you normally react with frustration, you pause and respond calmly. If you usually avoid a task, you pause and take a small step forward. If you act impulsively, you pause and delay your decision. These small changes begin to rewire your patterns, because every time you choose differently, you send a new signal to your brain. You show it that another response is possible. And with repetition, that new response becomes easier. This is how rewiring happens. Not through one big change, but through many small interruptions. Each time you move from reaction to intention, you weaken the old pattern and strengthen a new one. Over time, your default behavior begins to shift. What once required effort becomes natural. What once felt uncomfortable becomes familiar. This is how conscious thinking is built. It is not about controlling every thought. It is about guiding your responses. You still experience emotions. You still have automatic thoughts, but you are not controlled by them. You observe them. You pause, and then you choose. This process also builds something important: self-trust. Every time you choose intentionally, you prove that you are not stuck in your patterns. You show yourself that change is possible, that you are not limited by your past reactions, that you can respond differently. This builds confidence, not from thinking, but from action. You begin to rely on your ability to choose rather than your habit to react. Another important part of this process is consistency. One pause will not change everything. One good decision will not rewrite your patterns. But repeated pauses will. Repeated choices will. Consistency is what turns intention into habit. And habit is what shapes your life. You also need to be patient. There will be moments when you fall back into old patterns. Moments when you react without thinking. This is part of the process. It does not mean you have failed. It means you are learning. The goal is not perfection. The goal is progress. Each time you notice, pause, and choose, even once, you are moving forward. Over time, these small changes add up. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your reactions become calmer. Your decisions become more intentional. And your life begins to reflect that. Because your outcomes are not just based on what happens to you. They are based on how you respond. And when you shift from automatic reaction to conscious choice, everything changes. You are no longer repeating the same patterns. You are creating new ones. Patterns that align with your goals. Patterns that support your growth. Patterns that reflect who you choose to become. This is what it means to break the mental pattern, not by force, but through awareness, pause, and choice. Because the moment you realize you have a choice is the moment you stop being controlled and start taking control. Conclusion: you are not your automatic thoughts. They may feel personal, familiar, and convincing, but they are not always a true reflection of who you are. They are patterns, shaped by past experiences, emotions, and repeated behaviors. And until you become aware of them, they quietly guide your life. But awareness changes everything. The moment you begin to notice your thoughts instead of immediately believing them, you create space. And in that space, something powerful appears. Choice. Real choice. Not the illusion of reacting automatically, but the ability to pause and decide how you want to respond. That pause may seem small, a moment of reflection, a breath before reacting, a second of awareness. But small pauses lead to big changes, because every time you interrupt an automatic reaction, you shift the direction of your behavior. You move from habit to intention, from unconscious patterns to conscious decisions. And those decisions shape your life. Your life is not just the result of what happens to you, it is the result of how you respond. And your responses are built on your thinking patterns. If your thinking is automatic, your life will follow automatic paths. If your thinking is conscious, your life becomes intentional. This is where change begins, not with dramatic actions or sudden transformation, but with small, consistent awareness. Noticing your thoughts, pausing your reactions, choosing your responses. Over time, these small shifts create new patterns. You become less reactive, more aware, more in control, and as your patterns change, your future changes with them. Because conscious decisions create a different direction, a direction based not on habit, but on intention. You are not fixed. You are not limited by your past thinking. You are shaped by what you repeat and what you choose next. And every moment you pause and choose differently, you begin to create a new future.